Even before its release in May 1994, the Mysteriis Dom Sathanas was a mythical album. Created amongst blood, fire and death, Mayhem's debut album changed extreme music forever, and 30 years later it's still considered one of the pinnacles of black metal. In this series of podcasts, different artists comment on the importance that the album had in their lives and careers. My name is Matías Gallardo, and this is the Mysteriis Dom Sathanas 30 years. Joining me in this last episode is Ivar Bjornson. Ivar is a Norwegian guitarist. He's one of the founding members of the legendary band Enslaved. From his teenage years channeling black metal fury in the early 90s to pioneering the fusion of progressive rock with Norse-inspired metal, Ivar has remained a visionary force in extreme music. He's currently working on a new Enslaved album and also touring the world as part of the Battery tribute band Blood, Fire, Death. The very first question that I'd like to ask you is, what was your first contact with Mayhem's music? I know that you started pretty early, even playing in bands, extreme metal bands, but what was the case with Mayhem's music in particular?
Yeah, I first heard Mayhem, the deathcore stuff, which didn't really. It was cool. It was good. Grutle had that album. He was already quite. Me and Grutle started playing together with the first death metal band in '89. At which point he was already tape trading and in touch, writing letters with people in the scene inside and outside of Norway. And he had the Deathcore album, which we liked, obviously, and really especially found it fun that it had the catalog number Frank something with the cow. It's something I remember I was quite impressed by. And also, of course, the Mauritanian photos of the chopped off hams, it was an attention grabber. And of course, this pink cover thing that the original there, Grutle had, that was already quite legendary. That, there's a lot of talk, of course, and you had the letters, but there was no internet, which I guess made things maybe even more mythical. So everything had like a special meaning. This very different stories of why it turned out to be pink and so on. Music was cool, but a little bit, I don't know. At that time, I was really into death metal. It's quite punkish in a sense, Deathcore, and didn't really. It was a thing that I liked, but not like the Mysteriis later became. More of a musical religion for me. But so that's how I knew of Mayhem. But quite soon after. And this is kind of all of a blur, all these things happening as we sort of get into the scene with Enslaved, when we sort of disappeared off the map again and started Enslaved, started writing, and that's when all this stuff happened with Dead, I guess. And so in the little time before that, there was already this Chicken Brain, was it that Chicken Brain record, CBR, with this 2 tracks, and especially I remember that we were at the third friend's place, and Grutle put on this. He got the recording of the Freezing Moon thing. Check out Mayhem, the style change, and that really blew my mind to an enormous extent, I have to say, because there was something, and that I really hadn't heard before. And it's around the same time as we also got Blaze in the Northern Sky. So I can't, these things are kind of blurred with what happened first and which year and month and all that. But it's all around the same period. So 89, 90 is when Mayhem gets on my radar, yeah.
And by then, were you also guys writing and maybe even meeting the people in Mayhem?
Yeah, so Grutle he'd already been in touch with Euronymous for a little while, and they were pen pals, and quite similar in their way of approaching music, almost, like very, almost scientific and librarian style, like historians with who played in this band, and he was the neighbor of this guy who owned a dog, who played drums on that album and so on, very detailed knowledge of stuff. So I met Euronymous, but we had this thing where we would go, we were on the west side of Norway, Haugesund, south of Bergen, and there would be a bus who went to Oslo, like a 9-hour, and it was for town in the evening, and then you'd be in Oslo the next morning. But what we would do most of the time was take it halfway, because that would be the Emperor guys, which we were also writing with, actually a little bit before they became Emperor. It was the Thou Shalt Suffer and all that, the demo bands that they were before. So we took the bus, got out there, off there, partied with them. They were also from like a small place, just on a in country version, and we were coast people. So we're hanging out there a little bit, and then we all went into Oslo and went to Helvete, Euronymous' shop. So yeah, it was sort of easy social relation, considering that Grutle was already sort of a pal with him, and he was very interested. As I was the songwriter, and guitarist, I was really admiring all these older guys. Euronymous he was a guitarist that had a very distinctive sound, and he started playing these demo things that they started recording in Grieghallen, because that took a lot of years from the first recording. And we were there, and the guys like Hellhammer would stop by the shop all the time, and he also became a good friend. He even came over to Bergen when we recorded our first album in '93. Viking Veldi didn't come out before '94, but in '93, Hellhammer was there because we were like, "What the fuck? How do we do the drum sound like in a proper studio?" Well, how we didn't have any experience, so he came down and helped us out with that. So Euronymous was incredibly. He liked to share his ideas, and I think he enjoyed sort of like having a bit of a role as a mentor in a sense, because he heard stuff with Enslaved that he liked, and he tried to give directions and some hints, what works, and not in a sense like not the competitive type. Like he didn't want to make a point that his ideas were better. He never criticized, said this is bad. He just he found positive things that he sort of reinforced, and he was really willing to give away. He wasn't I'll keep my songwriting tips to myself. He was really sharing, especially what him and Snorre, the Thorns guy, working on ideas already for the album to come after the Mysteriis, that had a lot of theoretical thoughts behind it, on how to utilize the guitar and so on. So in all this, we kept listening. He played stuff for us, and I remember once we came to Helvete, me and Grutle. At this point, Grutle had a car. Had turned 18, 4 or 5 years older than me. And I remember Euronymous gave us like the final mix before they started doing vocals for the Mysteriis, and we could hang on to it for 3 hours or something. So we just drove around Oslo in his car, listening on the car stereo and stuff like that. So I guess maybe because of my age, but also since we had a bit of a different approach, I guess we didn't have the same enthusiasm for the satanic stuff as many others had. I guess that also gave an incentive to the talks being very, very music nerd orientated. Yeah, that was like how basically the relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, he was even encouraging you guys with the Viking influences that you had at the time, that we should mention that it wasn't as common as you see today in extreme metal bands. So that was something that Enslaved was doing that none or not many other bands in the scene were doing, because they were focused on this sort of satanic side.
Yeah, he was very encouraging. He didn't mind that in a sense, he saw the kinship. And I have to say, like the first time I came in the shop in Helvete, I wanted to give a good impression and be a cool kid and all that stuff, and aware of being a lot younger than the others. I asked him, like, is there any new death black metal I should check out? And he said, like, nothing exciting is happening there, but check out this stuff. And then he pointed me to the prog section and the 70s, like synth and ambient stuff. So that's how I came across all that stuff, from Klaus Schulze to Tangerine Dream, and to the Swedish prog bands like Englagor and Anekdoten and all that stuff. And so he was really, he had that side. I guess there was no reason for him to talk about that in the Mayhem interviews, I guess. At that time, and also it was a time when things were a lot more sectionized. If you're a metalhead, that was also into a lot of other stuff, and in a band you didn't talk too much about that. That was more of a something peculiar and not something relevant or whatever. But yeah, that's totally true. We were actually quite alone. We were always discussing like which other. There was Bathory, of course, with the Hammerheart and Twilight of the Gods albums. You had a Swedish band called Heavy Load that had some Viking imagery. Of course, Manowar sometimes, but that was kind of hard to take serious since they were always in their underpants, and had a sort of a bit of a macho beef New Jersey kind of vibe to the Viking. More of a outside looking in, not so much. Yeah, more in the category of, the Canadian guy Thor.
Yeah.
That kind of cartoonish stuff, which kind of surprised us, I have to say, later with, and I think it would have annoyed Euronymous too, to see that while the sort of the Viking thing that we thought we were working on had this like Fight of the Gods and Hammerheart, he is Horton is he's mixing it up with psychology, philosophy, some Nietzschean stuff. Not as straightforward and like survival of the fittest as people misunderstand it to be and so on. I don't think anyone. I remember we played at the German festival later in the 90s, and there was a Viking metal stage, and we were like, oh, there were other bands. And then we saw what was going on, and we were like, oh my fucking God. I hope we didn't. This is not our fault or anything, because then everybody was jumping around and doing Eurovision stuff, playing accordions. And it's like, that's not what we intended.
Yeah, and not even historically accurate.
No, not at all. Not even close, I think. But that's a common misunderstanding, mixing up like the jolly medieval times with historical times before that. Fun fact is, we remember the first time we met another band that they said, you should meet these guys next to this. There's a new band playing at this festival on a small stage. And it was one of their first shows outside of Sweden, and that was Amon Amarth.
Mm-hmm.
That was like in the early 90s. It's kind of fun. And they were really, cool guys, but they were more of a death metal band. And we were like, hey, good luck, guys. And I guess they had a good luck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Weird to think about it today that there was like no other bands today. It's the other way around. It's hard to find a band that's not the Viking band today.
Yeah. So, would you say that these conversations that you guys had, this feedback that he gave you, definitely influenced what you guys were doing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Everything from these albums that were recommended to us, which is still very, very important. Prog and experimental music is I would say together with black metal is the main elements. So yeah, that's it. And then pure just technique, how he was playing guitar. That's another thing that you can say seems commonplace today, but was kind of weird back then. Is like the way of using the chords and a more, let's say, not classical, because that's such a fucking cliche. Like guys like, oh, I listened to classic music when I was 2 years old. Like that makes you smart or something. But it's more the way of thinking of the music in a more, I don't want to say symphonic either, but more of a massive way. He was thinking in these Gothic cathedrals, not Gothic like a sexy German or Bram Stoker Dracula thing, but these like massive pillars. Yeah, like the title implies, the Mysteriis Dom Sathanas, like these, and like mysteries, big weaves of sound. And he was applying that theory to guitar. They were thinking like, how can you just voicing, how to use all six strings, or on his ideas for thinking ahead was involving using a lot more guitars, almost like an orchestra thing, like orchestrating and creating big movements in that sense. And that was hugely inspirational, taking it from the power chords with the occasional crazy finger position and just moving it more into almost a more traditional compositional way of thinking. That was very inspiring. And to the sound of how it sounds, it's in pop culture there's Dark Side of the Moon, and in black metal there's the Mysteriis. It's just keep putting on albums and end up wondering like, why don't they get any further, or close. It's still hugely influential, this relationship with Euronymous, and of course the album itself.
Yeah, and I've always think he always had this like open mind sort of approach when it comes to music that is sometimes lost in the way when people write or speaks about him, because obviously the focus is on the more sort of no shit anti-poser kind of attitude that he was projecting maybe with the Euronymous character, and this all satanic all the way kind of thing. Particularly in your case, I think what's great is that this open-mindedness was taking him to share his knowledge with someone that was like, you were like 10 years younger, something like that, which in terms of maybe age is not so much when you grow old, but at the time you were really young, and he was like 15 and 25, something like that. That's a really huge difference when you are that young.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and that's something that speaks for like the strength of the scene back then. There was such a dedication to the thing itself, to the music, to the art, to create something. And the ultimate goal was to create your own thing. That was what, of course, also hard. I do understand that people pick up on the things, but I guess he was a clever guy, and he was doing his version of what I guess Venom and those guys were doing in the 80s. Venom would spend like their last bucks on renting a limo so they can arrive outside the club to make it look like they had so much money that they didn't know how to spend it, and use walls of amplifiers and stuff like that to create an impression of where we want to go. And he did sort of the same thing with the satanic thing, a total lack of compromise. A very, as he said himself before he passed away, he realized that some of this didn't reach all the way, that people mixed up sort of character and person and all that stuff. I don't know. I don't really know what he was thinking, but that was how I took it. Yeah, that he had a character that he was very dedicated to, this Euronymous character, and it certainly worked. So yeah.
And how did Enslaved ended up working with Deathlike Silence in a way? I mean, you guys presented a demo that you had at the time, and he suggested that he would release your music.
Yeah, he was already had started with a few releases. Merciless, of course. There was Bursum, and it was everybody knew about the coming. The Mysteriis would be there and so on. So this was in 91. We did a first demo thing with Enslaved, where the songs were more or less written as we went in the studio. It was called Nema, but we realized that after a few days, we should have waited longer, and we checked the ultimate tests. We sent it over to Euronymous, who said the same thing. This is too soon. It's like you recorded the demo at the first rehearsal, so just give it a year or something and then do it. So that's what we did. And then in the summer of 92, or the spring, we started recording this demo, which would become Handala. And as we had recorded all the guitars, bass, drums, so we're missing keyboards and vocals because we ran out of money, basically. So we said that we'd call the guy in the studio back in a month or something. And in that time, there was a concert in Oslo. So we went over there to Helvete. And we asked Euronymous to, if he wanted to hear the demo. It's not finished. We're missing the vocals. So yes, of course. And then he told everybody to shut up. And that there was a bunch of people that are going to the show too. And what we ended up doing was like standing next to the stereo in the shop. And Grutle did the vocals with the demo running, and I would like supply information. There will be keyboards here like this, orchestra, blah blah blah, master's hammer, kind of blah 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 blah. And he listened through the whole thing, the whole 45 minutes, and then he just said like, if you guys want to sign to Deathlike Silence, I'm ready. This demo is exactly what I was hoping for with Enslaved. So that's when we got the deal right there, and then it was pretty crazy. And then we went to the nearest pub. Grutle had a beer, and I had Coca-Cola, and that was a celebration.
And what show were you guys attending?
I can't recall. There was some American. If it could have been the Morbid Angel show, I think.
Okay,
That's the only thing that would pass by Norway, and that those genres would be like just the biggest. And that at that time, that was basically Cannibal Corpse, which didn't interest us too much, and Morbid Angel, which was and still is very good. Yeah.
Well, so still at the time, Euronymous was working with Mayhem on the release and on the recording of the Mysteriis. That took, of course, a long time. It was something that the band was working very early on, even with Dead when he was in the band. So, what was your impression when you finally got to hear the album, the version with the vocals?
Yeah, I remember when we heard it with the vocals, it was just astounding. It was perfect. We were already big fans of Tormentor. Grutle was pen pal with Attila back then. He was very keen on we were big fans on the Eastern European bands, which all Euronymous also was. Tormentor and Master's Hammer, of course, but also Vader. That was very early on. a couple others, but especially these two, Tormentor and Master's Hammer. I would say the Master's Hammer is probably the one that it's really under-recognized how much they influenced the Norwegian scene, especially bands like Enslaved and Immortal. There's so much blatant Master's Hammer rip-off on the first few albums. But also Tormentor, the whole atmosphere, the theatrical, again, the Gothic cathedrals, satanic books written in blood, all that kind of vibe around it. Nosferatu, of course, the old one with Klaus Kinski, 78 was a big inspiration. And when you meet it, it kind of sounds like Nosferatu from
Yeah.
Listen to the children of the night. It's he might actually be Nosferatu when I come to think of it. So that was just perfect. Everything, the accent, the again, something really progressive and half insane in a sense, in the same way as a lot of guitar things are made nowadays. That's how you do it, sort of. Back then it was just blew the wigs off everyone. When some people didn't get these vocals, and I think I still get pissed off when people go like, "It would have been a great album with dead singing." Yes, of course, but just to consider the possibility of not appreciating those vocals is for me insanity, because they're pretty much perfect.
And something that I wanted to discuss with you, especially as a guitarist and someone that eventually got to record as well in Greek Hallen and work with P10 on your albums, is the sound of the album, not just in terms of where it was recording in Greek Hallen, which I think is something that we can discuss, but also in the way the guitars are done, because it sounds, I think I recall I discussed this with Snorre, because he was around the band at the time, that they had many tracks dedicated to the guitars, so the sound eventually became something that was really peculiar, added to this natural space that Greek Hallen has. So I wanted to know your perspective on those characteristics of the album.
Yeah, it's I think the sound is so fantastic. The guitars on one side, with these enormous walls that are built again and with the theory behind it, and also with it's a weird mix of, it's extremely accurately played, but it's the sound is, it's played as if it was like a gent band, it's very, he was very attentive, and Snorri is also, that's why his guitar playing is so fantastic, with the sort of these long runs of 32 and 16 thirds and all that, these extremely fast picking things, extremely distorted sound with the Euronymous, with his Marshall stacks and distortion pedals, and then this accuracy with the pick, which is today this sort of that you have progressive metal, they have a very, very clean sound in the sense to get that picking technique sort of through. On the Mysteriis, it's sort of the opposite. It's there's so much technique, and then it's almost buried in room and reverb in a sense, and that makes it pretty fantastic. It's something that's still sort of, it's chasing me, that you have to find a sort of an accuracy within something that you allowed to be a bit chaotic in a sense, because you got all these harmonic things happening because of the noise levels and so on. And you can hear with the guitar that it's these little feeds almost that's in between, because the picking is super hard, it's mega distorted, and there's so many of them. And it's also, Pitten is a representative of a type of engineer and producer that's sort of digital in a sense. So he's appreciative of this warmth and appreciative of these extra things that are happening, that are starting to become alive in these many guitar tracks. With the drums, we heard it when it happened, and it's still a story that people talk about, because it's so amazingly cool that they just snuck into the room of the Philharmonic Orchestra and put up the mics and record it on the stage there in the Grieghall, which is an extremely well thought of, planned acoustic room where the Philharmonic Orchestra plays every week now. And then they would take it down again and then pretend that they didn't do it during the next day. So that's also a little bit of the punk attitude that snuck into that whole thing. Yeah. So the mix of those two things that are results of very interesting ways of thinking, combined with an almost like aggressive attitude, both with Euronymous and Python, having this attitude that ideas should be tried and not having a single second of doubt whether to do it. These days people would buy a lot of plugs and try all kinds of things, and that's kind of a lost art, that whole thing. I think it's a result of those two guys basically meeting, and Euronymous could have gone to a bunch of studios where people would have just offered a lot of more resistance, but I think it actually just inspired Python. He just wanted to do it.
Yeah, and also it was a time where there wasn't this maybe saturation that maybe nowadays you get the idea that there's nothing else to try because everything is like a template where you know how to get that particular sound, and there's not much experimentation even with producers, because there's almost like all this notion of I want to sound like someone else, and I know how to do it, so we can emulate that. And at the time, I think the also for in your case, there wasn't many references. You mentioned Master Hammer, you mentioned Tormentor, but if you go back to those early Enslaved albums, they sound different from that, and I've always saw those albums as something that was like very keen in spirit with what was happening in Greek Hall and with Python, but with your own kind of twist.
Yeah, and that's what Python says. Still do a bunch of hang out with Python quite a lot. Funnily enough, we work together also a lot afterwards with live concerts and so on. The special thing with Python is that if you listen to like the 50 albums or something from that era, you have like the best sounding black metal albums, like the Mysteriis, and then quite frankly, you have some of the stuff that is probably quite high up on the shit list to crap sounding. Because the thing with Python is like you go into the studio with gold, then he polishes it. If you go in with shit, he also does a great job, but he won't change anything. It's not his. He never goes into song structures or things like that. Like that's not his. He works with folk music and black metal. That's the things that he enjoy the most, and those things are mainly, they have a thing in common, and that the good stuff is mainly done compositional wise, lyric wise, when you get in the studio. So then you get to spend the time and the creativity on it's like how to create a certain atmosphere. Like this thing ending up recording in a room of the Philharmonic Orchestra, or spending hours and running around finding the right mirror that would give a reflection back to the mic for this particular guitar tone or something like that. And I think that's a very exciting and cool. It's a very risky focus because you need to have a band that already know who they are, and the thing that they are that's what's going to come out, And I really like that. And I think to some extent we still try and emulate that a little bit by producing a lot of our albums ourselves. We're at the point where, okay, so quality or success or something, that's one thing, but just being a band that's 35 years old now, like we are, is something that would give us access to some producers, I guess. Like this is back from the 90s. Would you like to produce the Enslaved album? And we could but that's not really interesting because we like to work with the professionals when it's at the point when it's too late to fix it. They can, like Jens Bogren, he mixes, so he can do wonderful stuff, but it's still going to be what it is. We want to. So yeah, I guess that's also why we are becoming a band of more and more of us are involved with sound. Like Ivar's an actual studio producer and all that stuff, and he's a bit of Python really. He talks about that sometimes, and he was really, really happy with Ivar's remastering or vinyl mastering that didn't really exist for the Mysteriis. That he feels that they're working with the same kind of philosophy.
Yeah, and it speaks volumes of how formative was this sort of approach for you guys, that after so many years you still think in those terms.
Yes.
How to approach your music.
Yeah, it's really important, and I think it gives us a weapon to resist digital death, which is a killer for a lot of creative people. Because we still have that layer we still discuss in terms of when we do an album that we discuss in images, or concepts or whatever, that we have words, concepts, thoughts, images that we want to steer the album towards. And then it doesn't really matter if it's a tape deck or a computer that's recording the ideas, because that just becomes sort of white noise. That's just the stuff that you push to make the album come through. So it's not. We never gave into the process of sort of becoming, digi-fascinated, which seems to be a hard thing to get out of again when people get stuck in the studio and record the same album for over and over again, because it's sort of like looking at the sun or something like that. That we're content of knowing the sun's there, and it's probably okay to fix. We could have fixed this, but why should we? It's not. It's not like this is not how it is. It's not a natural state for a kick drum to be heard on every single stroke. That's not natural in a metal band, because there's a lot of loud other things going on, for instance.
Absolutely. So something that I didn't ask you, the band was recording the album in Bergen because Greek Calden is there. I think it was 92, 93. Were you there at those sessions? Were you able to meet the guys at the time?
No, not during the recordings. No, I think because at that time we were still living in Haugesund, so we went to Bergen, hung out with the Old Funeral and the Immortal guys a bunch. But no, not at the same time.
I know that this is maybe hard to answer, but I want to know what's your favorite songs on the album and why.
Oh boy, I think Life Eternal is some, I guess, the one that springs to mind, because it's of the main theme. If you heard the song, Enslaved song, Thurisas Dreaming.
Yes.
From that's a tribute to that one that we talked about. We said at some point we're going to do it anyway, so we might as well be conscious about it and do it all the way, because there was just something about that whole song. Of course, the lyrics written by a man, or he was a young man who ended his own life is one thing. From that perspective, of course, a remembrance, and there has been a lot of folks that we've known, including Euronymous also, that was dear to us that went away too early. So that has one thing. With the song itself, with the main theme and the lead and everything, we've covered the song. That's really a special one. And then so many fantastic things going on that album. Freezing Moon, I guess it's because it's the song that we've known for the longest, and we've done it with Attila, which was, to put it mildly, a very special occasion, special thing to do. And I'm just going to end up mentioning them all, but let's try. And Buried by Time and Dust has a tempo change that is just one of the cleverest things that I know in metal composition. Can't stop there. Cursed in Eternity, vocals and just like the blast beats. There's something with the fast parts on the Mysteriis, and perhaps especially on Cursed in Eternity, that has this quality to it where the drums are doing, I would say, mid-paced. It's not Dark Throne on cross country skiing, 115 sort of like fuck off slow blast beat, but it's still not like American Canadian guys filming their own feet or not touching the bass drums and going like, ooh, 215. It's insane, but it's something in there. It's elegant, it's groovy, it's quite flashy in a sense, like a little bit like Hellhammer himself. It's like all these good drummers, legendary drummers, back to Bonham and all the boys. It's like they're a little bit flamboyant in a sense. They know what they're doing is insane, that it's not supposed to be done, but they're still doing it. So, but keeping a little bit back. I think this is the perfect amount of tasty in a sense in the drums, because it's got all these little syncopations, accentuations, and all that stuff that makes it just groovy in a sense. And then you have the guitars going on not the same note division, but one like triplet more in a sense. Make sense?
Yeah, yes.
So you get that, and some bands, I really love that when it happened. I don't know if he got that from playing in Mayhem, but he certainly brought it to Au Noir, Blasphemer. That thing where the guitar is going like one notch faster than the drums in a sense, and it just gives it this enormous sense of speed, but not in the sport sense, with these YouTube world record drummers, which isn't groovy at all. It's just blur.
Yes.
But it gives this elegance to it, like you're going one step faster. And Cursed in Eternity, a good example of that, I think. It just gives this journeying vibe in a sense. Like the song is never going to end. It just feels like it's really massively energetic. And it's played in a very relaxed manner in a sense. And that just gives it a sort of this, yeah, Nosferatu, like it's bleak, it's dark, mysterious, but it's extremely powerful, but kind of understated. Yeah.
Well, and something that I was wondering is that, of course, Euronymous has become an icon. It's been a long time now that he passed away, and he sadly didn't see the album released. I know he got the final version, he got to hear that, but it wasn't like he saw it released. So I wanted to know, how do you see his figure compared with the person that you knew? Because it's kind of mind blowing that he today would be like a 25-year-old guy, and it's sometimes that perspective gets lost in this sort of iconic way that he's viewed righteously.
Yeah, it is a function of human memory, I guess, and this, especially when people pass away, and especially when there's controversial circumstances around their deaths, as we've seen in politics, as we've seen in other genres, that myth is something that we crave, and myth is a very important function of why our strand of highly evolved mammals survived in our battle with more intelligent and stronger Cro-Magnon people, because we had myths and we had social fabrics, and the myths are a way of creating those, I guess. So I'm never going to protest that. I think, if people ask, like you've done, like, is there a one-to-one relation between Euronymous as the figure that you see in the media and the one that you knew? I could say no, definitely not. Again, there's reasons why, he might have had, and I know this from both past and coming documentaries of people knew him, that he had sides that you could say was less than sympathetic, and just, we didn't know him and Dead and all those people are on a level where we could say, if someone was to blame, and if he had a part in that suicide and all that stuff, like people discuss. But that's not really, I can only discuss, my own experience. And I was lucky to, whether, I don't really care the motivations on why he chose to share that part of himself with me. It's not like you don't go around and wonder if your friends are they really secret Hitlers when you don't see them. Okay, I guess some people do, but they end up in hospitals as paranoid schizophrenics, I guess. Because yeah, I believe in the experience that I had, and that was one of a good friend, and I often wonder like what he would have thought of the scene, what he would have thought of Enslaved, and most curious, like what would have happened if he was him and yeah, maybe even together with Snorre, or I guess Snorre wasn't well at that time, so maybe he was on his way out of that environment of friends around you anyways. But yeah, just imagine Euronymous continuing working with that progressive mindset. Or was it possible because he wasn't there? Who knows? We're never going to get those answers.
Yeah, well, but just for the sake of it, and maybe this is a fun exercise. Do you think that the approach that Mayhem took after, when they came back with Wolf, Lairs Abyss, and Grand Declaration of War, especially, sort of reflected this more avant-garde and open mind that Euronymous had?
Because they definitely went avant-garde with, and the album in second place when it comes in the Mayhem catalog, the Odo ad Kao.
Okay, yes.
But it's such a different way of thinking avant-garde. I guess it would be like comparing progressive apples with progressive oranges. But no, it's the Mysteriis Dom Sathanas is sort of like there is a continuing canon in terms of the same people being involved, but it's like, yeah, it's like Christmas, but it's run by the Easter Bunny instead of Santa Claus, to give a horrible comparison. It was such such the musical the thing that is the Mysteriis is so tied up in the personality and in everything that is and was Euronymous that it simply couldn't be that after that. So you could have a discussion, and if people told me I like the subsequent Mayhem better, I would say like it's a matter of taste. But for me, it doesn't make sense to discuss the Mysteriis as part. I think there's the Mysteriis, and then there's everything else with the Mayhem name in a sense.
Okay, well, and what's your current relationship with the album? I wonder if you play it often, if you have it as a reference when you are about to write music or produce an album or get into things with Enslaved, and it works as a sort of guiding star, because I guess your perspective hasn't changed through the years in terms of how much you love the album, and because you mentioned from the get-go that this is an album that from the very start was influential to you and was important, and you recognized how important this album was. So I guess this opinion sustains today.
Absolutely, it's the same, I would say, as the Hammerheart album by Bathory. These two albums, I listen to them a lot, and then it fucks me up to listen to the same album too much, and then I take a break. Sometimes a few weeks, sometimes a few months, and then I listen to it too much again. So yeah, I still listen to it all the time. Yeah, it's kind of like because it's so close to the heart with black metal and extreme metal, that it doesn't really make sense to listen to much else in a way for me. Of course, there's Dark Throne when you're out skiing, but I try to sometimes to like pull myself up by the neck and like, you gotta listen to some new stuff, man. Yeah. And then I check out some new stuff, and then I go back to the Mysteriis. Yeah.